Hello, I'm Dan Bowhay, a photographic artist from the United Kingdom with a practice focusing on photography, moving image and installation. Much of my recent practice has been autobiographical, with projects focusing on my disability through a personal, social and political lens. But before I discuss this, I want to talk about some of my previous projects which explore place and human interaction. Off-season was a project that explored my curiosity about the sheer number of beach huts that span the length of Bournemouth Beach. From sandbanks in the east, through Bournemouth, Boscombe, Southbourne and to Muddyford Sandbank in the west. The project explored the desire to understand how people use these spaces, especially during the off-season months. Along the 17 kilometres of coastline, I individually documented the 3,531 beach huts that span this distance. I found this subject to be constantly changing. During the project, 7 beach huts were demolished to make way for a new lifeguarding building. Since the project, a landslip has damaged a further number of huts, and a proposal has been made to demolish a further 29 huts, one of which being Bournemouth's oldest beach hut. Over the course of the journey, the uniform way in which I documented the huts, influenced by the work of the Beckers, showcased the unique and colourful ways people decorated their huts. But consequently, this also shed light on the declining state of others. Despite the significant financial commitment it takes to either rent or own a hut, even for an off-season rental, or especially in Muddyford, where a hut recently sold for $500,000, most of these huts were not in use. However, on the few occasions a hut was open, the images provide a glimpse at its occupants and into the internal spaces of the huts, a space that is typically both incredibly private, but also incredibly public by the nature of how it is positioned along the coastline. I presented the images in a photo book, in linear arrangement and in sequence. This allowed the viewer to make comparisons between beach huts and showcase some of the intentional patterns created within groupings. The photo book also shines a light on the evolving subject and the demolition of the 7 huts during the project. The book overlays previously captured images on top of the demolition in progress. And thanks to the layout, the book forms a pseudo-map of the beach huts and serves as a record of this ever-evolving subject at this particular moment in time. To quote Neve Brown,
we were working then not to do social housing, but to do housing. Not to do a site, but to work on the idea of a piece of city. Revitalize and work with the society that was there.
Brutalist architecture rose to popularity in the UK in the 60s, filling a need for rapid redevelopment after the war. Working with bare bones materials, concrete, brick, alongside wood, steel and glass, architects were trying to find new ways to create high-quality social housing at a rapid pace. But being designed and built under the pressure and desire for change, many of these new developments fell short of their goals. Erno Goldfinger's Trellick and Balfron Towers fell victim to issues with crime and drugs, along with countless maintenance problems. The Smithson's Robin Hood Gardens was described by English Heritage as failing as a place to live, and cut-cost construction led to the collapse of Roman Point. But despite the disdain for the brutalist tower block, the progressive ideals of Camden's architects department led to the creation of some of the most successful brutalist social housing projects. Where the high-rise tower blocks failed, Camden's developments worked with a low-rise style, with the architects recognising the need to maintain a relationship between the residents and the environment. I shot using infrared film. This technique rendered plant matter in a luminous white, highlighting the important relationship that had been created between the architecture, its residents and its environment. In the project, I photographed the Alexandra Road estate, designed by Neve Brown, the Whittington estate by Peter Tabori and the Barbican estate. All 3 of these estates being highly notable for the relationship between the architecture and its environment. Low-rise was a project I undertook during my residency in the Bournemouth Underground Gallery. I split the photographs up into tiled sections and layered them on top of each other, a total of 670 pieces. I allowed the viewer to pull down and take with them a section of the work, revealing part of a new image underneath and encouraging the viewer to truly form a relationship with the architecture. Appreciating the ways the architects worked with bare bones materials and how they incorporated the environment into their design. This installation was also accompanied by a photo book showcasing the photographs in full alongside discussions about the estates, their design and development alongside how they were received by their residents and the public. Through conversations with peers, I began to understand how my visual impairment affects me and the relationship this causes me to have with photography. Blind in my left eye and lacking working focus in my right, I realised that I experience depth in the same way as a camera. Perceiving depth through two-dimensional clues and lacking the three-dimensional clues that humans with conventional sight predominantly rely on. I shot using a 5x4 camera, using the movements to capture a stereoscopic image pair, the left channel in black and white film and the right in colour positive, representing the vision I don't and do have. Presenting the images in a traditional stereoscopic arrangement would not be functional for me. However, I realised that by carefully positioning the images in front of one another in 3D space, I could use the parallax between the two images to gain an understanding of the depth in the scene. Stood to one side of the arrangement, objects in the foreground of the captured scene were being convergence, but whilst moving to the other side, the point of convergence moves from foreground to background. Through this technique, I could begin to understand to a limited extent how depth is traditionally perceived. The pair of images was presented in a custom designed and fabricated steel float frame. Illuminated from behind and stacked between layers of acrylic, the frame facilitated floating the images in 3D space and precisely offset the images from each other. This enabled the parallax depth effect and allowed me the understanding of depth that I had not experienced before. Being visually impaired from a young age, I revisited places of childhood memory, capturing and then re-exploring these places with a depth perception I did not experience as a child. Margaret Thatcher is once believed to have said that anyone over the age of 25 on a bus is a failure. In 1985, she passed the Transport Act, which set in motion the privatisation of buses. This led to the creation of powerful, privately owned monopolies and resulted in the decline in service quality that we see today. In the decade to 2019, over 3,000 routes were cut, £1.49 billion was lost to shareholders, and fares nearly doubled in real terms. And as of 2024, the big five private operators carry 70% of passengers. In 2008, the English National Concessionary Travel Scheme was launched, providing disabled and elderly travellers with a free bus pass. The scheme aimed to restore some freedom and personal mobility for disabled and elderly travellers, but it comes under criticism for its restrictions. It is only valid in England. Scotland and Wales run their own functionally independent and unrestricted schemes. There is no provision for travel on trains or coaches. The pass is only valid for local buses. And most controversially, on weekdays it's limited to off-peak travel. It is not valid before 9:30 AM or after 11 PM. To quote a report on the scheme by charity WizKids, the off-peak travel restriction implies disabled people do not hold a place in the working world, in educational settings or in wider social activities, and it denies them their right to equal opportunities. In 2025, I, a disabled traveller and bus pass holder, prevented by my disability from driving, attempted to see what freedoms the pass really returned to me. Travelling between the limits of the pass, I attempted to make my way from the most westerly point of England, Land's End, to the most north-easterly, the Scottish border near Berwick-upon-Tweed, travelling only on local buses and between off-peak hours. Whilst I was ultimately successful in my journey, it was far from simple. I undertook countless hours of planning to ensure a smooth journey, and ultimately it took me 10 days to reach my final destination. Whilst my journey is undoubtedly extreme, the planning and duration are simply extrapolations of the day-to-day issues faced by disabled travellers. Travel has to be planned around restrictive timetables, connections must be considered, and regardless, journeys take multiple times longer than in a car. During the trip, I photographed and filmed the journey, this concluding in a multiple hour-long, slow TV-inspired film that retells the journey in precise detail and slow speed, accompanied by a photo book that showcases the visual oddities of travelling the length of England by public bus, showing this summer in Copeland Gallery.
Chose the right bus.